Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would sit down and do a video for you guys and gals. Well, let me give you guys a bicep shot before we get started. Oh, Mount Bicephalus. All right, let's jump into the topic at hand. So the topic becomes, why do we see elevated resting blood sugar or high elevated or fasting glucose in people who do ketogenic and low carb diets? And people who follow these diets are not going to like the answer, but it's pretty well understood in the scientific literature. It's documented, and I have seen multiple people who have PhDs in the field specifically of nutritional science break it down and the reasons for it. And if we look at what happens in the metabolic ward, we know exactly why it happens. So when you jump into the topic, though, people hear that and they say, okay, well, what exactly is going on here? Because if you're not getting much sugar in your diet, right, you're not getting all of this glucose hitting your bloodstream, then why would your fasting glucose be up? Like, why would it be up? Shouldn't this help with metabolic resistance? Shouldn't it help with insulin sensitivity? And the answer is actually no. No, because carbohydrates themselves, normal carbohydrates like starchy based carbs, do not negatively affect insulin sensitivity. Okay, that's a massive misconception, an enormous, massive misconception that they affect insulin sensitivity. Refined sugars do. Okay, so yes, in theory, if you cut the refined sugars out of your diet, mainly when we say refined sugars, we don't mean any carbohydrate that has been refined or turned into some sort of sugar through some mechanism. We mean fructose. Fructose without fiber present. That is what we're concerned with. Fructose without fiber present. Hold on, I have a little spot. Let me get that. I got a little bit of pecani sauce, hot sauce from my potatoes and brown rice over there. So that's a concern, but what else is the concern? Saturated fat. When you look at the data, what do we see in the lab? Significant amounts of saturated fat cause both acute and chronic insulin resistance. Okay? Let me state that again. When it's looked at directly in the lab in controlled clinical trials where they can measure you right there in the laboratory, if someone is given a large amount of saturated fat, a normally healthy individual, and they test them 24 hours later, they will develop more insulin resistance. Their insulin resistance will go up from wherever it is that they were previously. People who eat large amounts of saturated fat are generally more insulin resistant, right? Yes, refined sugars cause this also. But it's kind of like people jump and say, aha, so it's all refined sugar must be what causes all of it. No, they both actually cause it. And they don't have to be consumed together to cause it. They're both things that cause it, right? Independently. Neither one of them require the other one to do it. So when you look at what the top experts say, they're like, yeah, because when you look at all the rest of their blood work, the people who follow these type of diets tend to be somewhat insulin resistant, and in many cases extremely insulin resistant. So isn't that what you would expect? That is why they have high fasting glucose. That's why they have high glucose in general. Because these are people who do not tolerate insulin well because they're resistant to it. Now people say, well, I don't understand why. Well, some of it, if you look at what goes on with the liver, you see the storage of liver fats and everything. We know that saturated fat raises liver fats more than anything else you eat, almost calorie for calorie, with fructose reaching the liver being the next thing behind it. But also when we start looking at insulin resistance, it causes it. And what it appears to do, particularly in your muscle tissue, so again, this could almost in some ways offset some of the positive benefits of weight training. It seems to kind of gum up the receptors is the best way to describe it. All right? So if you think of, and this is the way I've heard it described in layman's terms by many of the researchers and experts, because they're like, we see it, it's measurable, we see it happen. We know it happens. Directly measurable immediately in the lab. But what ends up happening is that if you think of The insulin receptor is like a hole, like this is how receptors work. And you think of the hormone or substance as a key that goes into that hole. It's an exact fit. Saturated fat tends to gum up the keyhole a bit in muscle tissue. Therefore, they're more insulin resistant. If you're more insulin resistant, it is harder for your body to dispose of glucose correctly. So it means your muscle tissue is going to tend to absorb glucose incorrectly. You're not going to absorb it as efficiently or easily. Therefore, you need more insulin to drive it. Okay? So, keeping in mind, you are not going to get your blood sugar down all the time, meaning production of blood sugar is necessary for survival. Your body will make it out of other stuff. It prefers to get it from straight starches. Hey, that's our efficient fuel source as a human. That is our primary fuel source. Glucose from starches, that is historically what our species has gotten most of its calories on for the vast majority of our ancestors through the vast majority of history for our species. But it will get it from other stuff. It'll make it from protein. It will make it from the glycerol backings of fat. You are going to have glucose. And if you don't, you will be dead in a very, very, very short amount of time. And no, that doesn't mean days. We're talking minutes. Minutes. You're unconscious within seconds. You're dead within minutes. Okay? Requirement. You have to have it. You have to have it to remain conscious on a second-by-second basis, or you black out. All humans. You don't dispose of it well, in particular your muscle tissue, your biggest glucose sink, when you're insulin resistant. Therefore, people on low-carb diets have high blood sugar by default. They're almost always pre-diabetic. If even low-carbers on ketogenic diets, it's very common for them to display the symptoms of being pre-diabetic. That includes the high insulin levels sometimes. That includes the high fasting glucose. That oftentimes it includes high inflammatory markers like A1C, all this other stuff. All right. So when you are one of the people out there and you see occasionally one of these experts who's like, well, it's okay. I mean, yeah, I do this ketogenic diet or this carnivore diet, and sure, my fasting glucose, sure my LDL is high, but it's fine. But all the leading experts in the area say it's not fine. Top cardiologists, top experts who work with diabetes, cancer will all tell you, no, it's not fine. It's indicative of future diseases coming. Okay? And the issue is the saturated fat. It is the high amount of saturated fat found in these diets. That is the problem. Okay? That is the problem. You don't see these same problems in people who eat very large amounts of starchy carbohydrates who don't eat a bunch of saturated fat or a bunch of refined sugars. You don't see it, even at the population level. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.